Let me begin the questioning. Admiral, I wanted to talk a little bit about what seems to be kind of a misalignment of demands and capabilities. I think it's pretty safe to say the Coast Guard cutters fleet, it's smaller, certainly smaller than it was 15 years ago, but the demands, as I kind of hinted at, and so did Senator Baldwin, on the Coast Guard have only been increasing. How can the Coast Guard meet modern mission demands that are going up? I don't think anyone thinks that's not the case, despite having nearly 14,000 less major cutter operational hours available. Do you believe there's a gap between mission demands and what the new recapitalization program is focused on?
Thank you for the question. Our whole recapitalization program is all driven by the need to fill those gaps, the increasing demands on the Coast Guard. With our 11 statutory missions, there's lots of demands on our people and our assets. We find that the assets that we're procuring, national security cutters, fast response cutters and such, are typically more capable than what they're replacing. And so we're finding that we're able to deploy for longer periods of time, that they have longer ranges, better speeds. The ships are more habitable for the crews, so it's less exhausting for the crews and such. So the crews' operational tempo, they can maintain a higher operational tempo, things of that nature. In particular, to put some numbers out there, as you know, in Alaska, we're going to be putting some fast response cutters up there, replacing the aging 110s. So there are 7 110s up there, and we're going to replace them with 6 fast response cutters. And it may on the surface look like there's a mismatch there. The 6 doesn't equal 7. As it turns out, the fast response cutters, we can actually deploy those for about 2,500 hours a year each. The 110-foot patrol boats can only do about 1,800 hours. And so when you kind of look at just from a number of hours available, 6 fast response cutters is about equal to about 8 1/3 110-foot patrol boats, right? And we're also putting some 87s up there as well. So even the numbers are going to be better.
No, I'm very aware of that, and that was a letter from the former Commandant Admiral Zunkoff to me on that capitalization program, which I think is a good beginning. I don't think it clearly answers the question. I know that number of 14,000 less cutter operational hours available was actually from GAO. So I think it's just it's an issue we need to continue to look at, because as I've talked to the leadership in the Coast Guard about, it's one thing to say we have a more capable platform, which I don't disagree with, but you also do lose something with less platforms. There's just so much in terms of the mission that you can do. So we're going to continue to focus on that issue. And again, part of what we want to hear from you is if you think that gap needs to be filled with additional recapitalization assets, then let us know, because that's the whole point. Right now, you have a very strong bipartisan approach to the recapitalization of the Coast Guard fleet. And very few people argue against that, given how old it is and given how important and increasing the mission of the Coast Guard is. So if you think the gap needs to be filled with the readjustment on the recapitalization program, then by all means, let us know. Let me ask another question. It's really for you, Admiral, but also Ms. Mack. We talked about, Senator Baldwin talked about shipbuilding in Wisconsin. There's actually, it's not to the extent of Wisconsin, but there's actually shipbuilding that goes on in Alaska in the Ketchikan Shipbuilding Yard. And it's actually quite important. We had the new Commandant, Admiral Schultz, up in Alaska a couple times this summer, and the ability to do maintenance, serious maintenance on some of these larger ships is clearly something that exists in Ketchikan. 4 home-based ships. I think the Coast Guard, for reasons that relate to some of the rules around small shipbuilding or small business activities has looked at that shipyard in a way that doesn't make sense in terms of being able to utilize that. Can you give me a sense of whether, and I know you were up there this summer, Admiral, and I think Ms. Mack, you were as well. Can you give me a sense of how you're looking at major overhaul repair work being done to actually limit costs and make it more efficient for the fleet in Alaska to utilize that shipyard in Ketchikan? Unfortunately, that shipyard just recently laid off a couple dozen people. So this is a really serious and immediate question that I know you were looking at this summer. I'd like to get your initial impressions.
We get this question fairly frequently, and the federal acquisition regulations indicate that if there are two or more small businesses that can do the work, you have to set it aside. And I think there are some people who feel that's optional, it's a guideline, but it's actually a regulation that we have to follow. So there are some things you can do.
Right, but the whole point of that, and I'm going over my time here, so I apologize to my colleagues, but the whole point of that is to give small businesses, small communities, the ability to do that work. Ketchikan, the shipyard there, is for a small community, and we've had this discussion for a long time. The intent of that regulation seems to be flipped on its head when you're looking at the exact point of that regulation is to help small communities with shipbuilding capacity, and yet because that shipyard is somehow connected to a bigger company several thousand miles away, you're penalizing a community that just lost several jobs in that shipyard. It makes no sense. So I'll let you finish your answer, but I think the bureaucratic focus on these regs, when we all know it's actually hurting the very people those regs are supposed to help, is starting to become a real problem. And I've had the Commandant give me his commitment to solving this, and already we're losing jobs there, and it would be cost effective for the Coast Guard, as opposed to sending ships all the way down to the lower 48 to get retrofitted and maintenance when you can do it right there in Alaska for the ships that are based in Alaska. So please finish your answer, but that's my view of it, and I hope your answer aligns with my view.
And I understand your frustrations and concerns, and we share those frustrations and concerns.
Okay, so how do we solve it?
Well, maybe the answer is to amend the regulations to give us the flexibility to do that. That would be helpful. We try to balance operational needs with costs. And so, as you pointed out, it costs money and it consumes time to take a cutter out of its general operating area near its home port and send it someplace else for maintenance. But the regulations require us to set those things aside. The area commanders look at these things, and when it becomes clear that we need to seek a waiver to get around that, like an operational or a geographic restriction, we go through that process, and we generally do that if there's a maintenance issue on the ship that prevents it from getting where it needs to go. If it is consuming far too many operational hours to transit to and from, and it limits what we can do in theater, those are all things that are considered when we make those decisions.
Well, I'm going to cut you off here, Admiral. I'm sorry, and Ms. Mack, I'll come back to you on this question if that's okay, but I do think the area commanders that I've talked to, all of them, agree with me on this, the Coast Guard District 17 commanders. So, but I'm sorry, I've gone way over my time. Senator Baldwin.
No worries, no worries. As I noted in my opening statement, Wisconsin is home to many experienced shipbuilders and suppliers. But some Wisconsin companies seem to be getting shut out of Coast Guard procurement. By way of example, the Coast Guard operates more than 700 boats that have outboard motors. Only 91 of those 700 use U.S. motors like those made in Wisconsin by Mercury Marine or Evinrude. In other words, 87% of Coast Guard small watercraft use foreign-made outboard motors. I introduced my Made in America Shipbuilding Act to address these unacceptable situations. by expanding current Buy American laws to cover all federal agencies, all classes of ships, and substantially more shipboard components, including outboard motors. So, Admiral, do you believe that procuring more U.S. manufactured shipboard components would strengthen the domestic industrial base and support U.S. national security?
So I'm proud to say that we comply with Buy American requirements currently, and if the regulations change, we would be on board and support that as well. The challenges we have with the industrial base is, if we're not careful, we create an artificial demand signal that's not sustainable. We want to go with American products and end-user items in our inventory, but we feel like if you want to keep the cost reasonable and be good stewards of our resources, competition is the best way to do that. And so, we try to maximize competition. The people that originally created the Buy American Act put in provision to provide flexibility for ship designers and shipbuilders and other agencies as well, for other procurements and such, to give them some flexibility, because sometimes there are items that just aren't made in America. There's just not a demand signal for industry to respond to. In other cases, there are, but they're not competitive in pricing. We don't typically tell the contractors what items must be U.S. built. We follow the Buy American Shipbuilding Act, which gives them a little flexibility, and that allows them to be competitive with one another and come up with competitive pricing and proposals. And so one proposal might offer certain ship items to be domestic and some foreign. Another one might be a little bit different, trying to distinguish themselves from one another. And then we do an evaluation of that based upon the evaluation criteria, whether it's like a best value or a low cost sort of thing. And then the shipbuilder or the designer goes through with the proposal as they've submitted it. So we make sure that we have all the shipbuilding, the Buy American clauses from the FAR are in our contracts to support that. And our program managers monitor that carefully to make sure that the shipbuilders are complying with that as well. But there are times when we end up with foreign components on some of our engines, like you've indicated, on the outboard engines and such. And typically for like small boats and such, once we do have a component, it doesn't make sense to just go out and change the things, unless there's something broken and need to be fixed. So when we have to do wholesale changes, that's all done competitively. But until that happens, we typically, for keeping the costs for maintenance down, because our maintenance dollars are precious and few, we typically stick with what we were provided until something forces us to go otherwise.
I'm going to dig a little deeper in this. So Coast Guard procurement contracts and subcontracts that are not bound by American laws, such as acquisitions of outboard motors, diesel engines, or auxiliary and deck equipment. Can you give me, or the committee, some examples of Coast Guard contracts with foreign companies?
For what I do in acquisitions, all of our ship designs and ship construction are done domestically. So our national security cutters built at Huntington Ingalls. The FRCs built down at Bollinger shipyards. The OPCs is going to be done by Eastern Shipbuilding.
But I'm seeking, can you give me some examples of contracts that the Coast Guard has with foreign companies?
I don't have that. I didn't come prepared to provide that. I can get it for the record.
If you can do that in follow-up, that would be great. This you may have to do also in follow-up, but how much taxpayer money does the Coast Guard spend on contracts with foreign companies annually? And if you want to just generally answer now and then follow up with specifics for the committee, that would be great.
I would need to take that for the record, ma'am. I don't have that data with me.
Okay. And then what proactive steps, if any, does the Coast Guard take to seek contracts with American manufacturers and small businesses in cases where the law does not require you to?
We are making a concerted effort over the last several years to communicate better with industry in general. So we try to do things like have industry days where we basically bring industry in and have conversations about what our current and future needs are to make it easier for them to identify opportunities to do business with the Coast Guard. So we've done a bunch of those as of late. We've done some reverse industry days as well, where they actually have the floor and help us to better understand how to do that sort of thing. So we're actively going after increased communications to help with that.
Great, thank you. We're going to start with a second round of questioning here. I think some of our colleagues are going to be coming back, but Ms. Mack, do you have any views on the issue that Admiral and I were discussing as it relates to the potential opportunity and cost savings, to be honest, of the shipbuilding yard in Ketchikan as it relates to maintenance? I don't know if you've looked at that issue, but it's an important one that could reduce costs and actually continue to create jobs in my state.
I have not looked at that issue, so I really am limited to what I can say, but I do agree that if it's in the regulation, and that's what Coast Guard has to follow, they have to follow the federal acquisition regulations. Anything that is differs from that would have to require an actual change in law, and that would have to be...
Or a change in regulation, right?
Right. Interpretation and...
Correct. Or a waiver.
Correct.
Right. Okay. Let me turn to an issue that I know all three of you have focused on and is really important to the country. And Mr. O'Rourke, your point is really important. We need to get it right. So I'm just going to open this up. It deals with the Polar Security Cutter and the acquisition timeline. You may have also seen, it's as the name indicates, it's not just important for the Coast Guard, but I think for the national security of the country, with increasing strategic interest globally in the Arctic region. Secretary Mattis has talked about this. All the COCOMs have. And so in this year's NDAA, signed by the President just a few months ago, there was a significant provision that I authored that has the authorization for 6 additional icebreakers to 3 polar class, 3 mediums. So here's my question, and I'm just going to throw it out to all of you because I think a good discussion on this is important. The initial schedule, which I think was a little bit kind of, spitballed, was 1 icebreaker will take 10 years and $1 billion to build, which, we put a man on the moon in a less amount of time than that in terms of the time. Where are we right now, and how can we do this correctly but accelerate the acquisition schedule? And I'm going to throw something out that'll, make the shipbuilders in America a little bit nervous, but, if it's going to take 7 to 10 years, why shouldn't we just lease some icebreakers? Polar class heavy icebreakers right now. Finns build them for $250 million a year. So I'd just like to open it up to all of you. Maybe Mr. O'Rourke, we could start with you, but I really would like to hear. And if you're in disagreement with each other, please go ahead and say that. It's always good when we have panelists who have a little bit of different views. It actually helps us.
In terms of accelerating the timeline, the Coast Guard has been able to do that relative to schedules we were looking at a few years ago in a couple of ways. One is by forming the Joint Integrated Program Office with the Navy, and they are using... We
all think that was a good move, so that's a good initiative by the Coast Guard.
Right, and the Navy is sharing their best practices with the Coast Guard, and that has helped to take some time out of the timeline. Secondly, the Coast Guard and the Navy have decided to use a parent design acquisition strategy. This is an icebreaker that will be derived from an existing icebreaker design, and that shortens the design time. That 10-year schedule you mentioned earlier was roughly 5 years to design and roughly 5 years to then build the lead ship.
So no one's saying 10 years and $1 billion for one ship anymore, I hope?
Not to my knowledge, and a big part of the reason is that the design portion of that 10-year timeline has now been compressed in part by adopting the parent design strategy. So these are 2 things that have brought the timeline shorter than what we were looking at earlier. And as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the estimated cost of this ship has come down perhaps considerably from that earlier $1 billion figure. And that may be due in part to the tank testing that's been done by the Coast Guard in conjunction with the Canadians up at the Canadian tow tank that has allowed us to examine hull designs for that ship that can more efficiently break ice than the older hull designs from 40 years ago, that can allow the engine and the propulsion plant to be smaller and the ship, therefore, to be smaller and less expensive. That's one reason, not the only one, why the estimated cost of the ship has come down. Now, that said, GAO has indicated that there's a risk of the lead ship being delivered late, and I agree with that assessment. The Navy's experience in building lead ships is that they often come in late, and so my sense is that there is a risk of the lead icebreaker coming in late, perhaps as much as a year or more late. And that has a couple of implications. One is that it could put some cost pressure on the ship. One of the reasons it might be late is that it's using more labor to build than what was originally projected. The Navy and the Coast Guard can insulate the government against that risk by using a fixed price contract, which the Navy and the Coast Guard plan to do. This can also have implications for what you do to bridge the time between the retirement of the Polar Star and that lead ship coming in, and that has implications for the amount of money you want to put into the Polar Star to extend its service life, for example, or to do a short-term bridging lease of a ship, which the Coast Guard has done in the past with some foreign icebreakers. Lastly, however,
Coast Guard has done that previously? I was unaware of that.
there have been 3 instances where the Coast Guard has done short-term leases of foreign icebreakers to bridge gaps in
How long is short-term?
This would have been on the order of maybe a year or 2. One of them involved the Swedish ship, and 1 or 2 of them actually involved Russian icebreakers.
Well,
which
we're
is
not
an
going to go with the
option that
Russian
might-
option, but
Right.
but anyone who's been on the Polar Star knows that it's I think it's a disgrace that we have men and women who serve in the uniform of the United States of America deploying on a ship that's that old, and they do a great job keeping it up to speed. But holy cow, that ship is
The
it's
foreign,
very, very, very old, and I think it's almost becoming unseaworthy.
the foreign icebreakers may not always be available for lease, and they have some other potential downsides as well. But we have done that in the past as a bridging option. But the one thing I'll finish by saying is that if there is a chance of a late delivery on the lead ship, then that could become an argument for beginning construction of the lead ship as soon as you bring the design of that ship to a high level of completion and the ship is otherwise ready to begin construction. If you think there's going to be a gap, why delay the start of the ship as long as the ship is ready to begin? That's the least you can do to minimize that gap in time that might result if, in spite of your own best efforts, the ship does wind up being late compared to its original schedule.
Ms. Mack, you want to comment on the schedules and other issues related to the
Thank you.
Polar Security Cutter?
Regarding the foreign icebreakers, regarding that question, I would say that foreign icebreakers from friendly nations generally serve different functions, different missions, and they break ice that is different than the polar regions. The National Security Cutter here is multi-missioned, non-nuclear, and it has to traverse the globe on different climates year-round, both poles. We don't have, even foreign nations don't have a cutter of that type. But it is also important to know with regards to schedule that the U.S. shipbuilding industry has not built an icebreaker of this magnitude in decades. So there's going to be a lot of significant requirements that are going to be needed and to be addressed. When it comes to schedule, overall, from an acquisition perspective, we've repeatedly found that compressed optimistic schedules is one of the main reasons why programs don't take this knowledge-based acquisition approach, and they end up causing a program to cost more in the long run, and that because you're doing a lot of concurrency and rework. So we are, in our report this past summer, we are encouraging the Coast Guard to take the time to do it right and to really focus on getting the knowledge base needed for design stability, technology, maturity, and address the schedule issues and put in reasonable times for schedules. At this point, the current acquisition only has a buffer, which is of 6 months between the target date of when they're supposed to deliver in September 2023 and then the baseline date of March 2024. There are no there's other schedule risks that aren't involved, which may or may not be within the Coast Guard's control. They have not planned time, basic layout of piping, machinery, cabling, testing, bid protests, some of the things that are out of their control, delays on the contractor side, all those need to be considered in their schedule as they build it.
Thank you. Admiral, and again, I apologize to my ranking member here. I think this is an important discussion that also relates to the Great Lakes as well as the polar region.
Well, I don't want to disappoint, but I don't have any major disagreements with my colleagues.
What about short-term leasing?
So for short-term leasing, we have looked at this, I would say, exhaustively. We did an analysis of alternatives, which took quite a bit of time, was pretty thorough, and looked across the globe at what sort of icebreakers were available to do the sort of missions that we need them to do. And we've quickly necked down to only two designs that would meet our needs. One was the Soviet, and the other one was a Canadian design that hasn't yet been built. For obvious reasons, we weren't going to go with the parent craft design from the Soviet Union, or from Russia, and so some of the designs that have been proffered, Leica will be using some of the Canadian design as kind of the basis of their design. We've looked at Scandinavian designs and such, and our mission is so different from theirs that their designs just simply won't work. There are some very unique things that we do, here in the United States and in the Coast Guard in particular. We need a polar security cutter that can transit from its home port in the United States all the way down to Antarctica to do a mission and come back. It has to be able to go all the way up into the Arctic and back. The Scandinavian countries don't go those distances typically, and not routinely like we do. So that requires some design trade-offs in terms of, a ship that breaks ice well is not one that handles well in heavy seas. And so there's trade-offs and things that need to be done. But we confirmed pretty quickly that there's nothing we can lease out there that will do the job. Now, the National Science Foundation has leased some foreign icebreakers for the McMurdo breakout in the past, and I think they've had mixed results with that. Sometimes they're available, sometimes they're not. But to do Coast Guard missions, to be able to be present in the Arctic, to do a massive search and rescue mission for the cruise line or something along those lines, the Polar Security Cutter is our best bet, sir, and that's why we're putting such an emphasis on it, and that's why we're moving hard and fast on that. And I concur with Ms. Mack. There are risks there. The schedule is tight, without a doubt, but we need this now, and so we have to move fast to make it happen. We concur with the recommendations that GAO made, and we're thankful that they looked at the program and made their recommendations, and we're moving out to address those things. But the need for the Polar Security Cutter is now. I think the Commandant has indicated we need 6 polar cutters. 3 of them need to be heavy, and we need 1 now. And we've enjoyed tremendous support from Congress on this, and we're hoping that we'll continue to get that support, sir, because any stall will have schedule and cost implications. But more importantly, any hesitancy on the part of resourcefulness sends a signal to industry, the industrial base, and sends them mixed signals on whether we're serious about it or not. We need them engaged, and we need them being innovative to come up with a solution that will work for us.
Thank you. Senator Baldwin.